So moving forward in terms of tradition, we would be remiss if we didn't address Duke Ellington's music in some form. Duke Ellington is really one of the cornerstone composers in jazz music. He wrote probably about, we estimate, 2,000 compositions in his lifetime in various settings, including music for movies, his sacred concerts later in his life that were intended to be performed in church, dance tunes that have become what we call standards. They're jazz standards. They're tunes that were written by a jazz musician for the purpose of improvising. Lyrics were added later to some of his tunes that we may recognize, like Satin Doll and so forth. But Duke is one of what I think of as maybe the 2 or 3 real cornerstone composers in this music, Thelonious Monk being another. So this particular tune, Mood Indigo, of course you know that indigo is a shade of blue, so blue mood, right? And Duke was a great collector of ideas, so he would hear things and assemble them. And the story that I remember about this particular tune is that it's a reformation of something that someone in the sax section, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's maybe Harry Carney, who played Barry and clarinet in that band. It was something that, it was a little musical idea that he had. And so Duke would hear these things in the presence of his players, and he would just kind of file them away in his mind and reorganize them later into the tunes that we now know that have really become a part of our language in jazz. So in I think it says in my bio, in 1991, when I was a graduate student, I had the good fortune to work with James P. Newton Jr. as my mentor. And James, at the time that I entered CalArts, had just come back from a trip to the Smithsonian where he was allowed, this was, of course, before the internet, he was allowed to go into the Smithsonian and wear a pair of gloves, and all of Duke's scores were laminated and preserved, and you have to take them out in a particular way, and he was allowed to lay them on the copy machine. And one of the activities that he did with me as my mentor was he handed me an LP of Such Sweet Thunder and these copies that he had made at the Smithsonian, and said, I want you to take this and make it sound like this. Because at that time, no score existed for that. And I tell you this because it gives us an insight into the way Duke thought and how he operated. Looking at those scores, it wasn't a score like I have here on the podium, where everything is laid out end to end. I can know exactly what everybody is doing or supposed to be doing at any given time. Duke wrote on that sort of paper, but he wrote in sketch form. So up in the upper right-hand corner, there would be a little something, might just be a melody, and it would have someone's name by it. And in another corner, there would be something maybe harmonized, and it would say saxophones. And so there was no real score to a lot of the music. Someone was creating parts from that, and that's what I had the opportunity to do, was really get inside of it. And there, Duke basically was responsible for codifying the writing style for large ensemble in the United States. And he did this basically through his own experimentation, of course through listening, of course through study, but not in a formal way, in an informal fashion. And he basically figured out that the members of the band were like a color palette. And if Tricky Sam had his pixie mute in the trombone and the plunger over the pixie mute, he said there were only about 7 notes that really sounded good. So take those and mix those with someone else's notes that really sound good, and you start to have your palette. And so it's out of, his writing is an outgrowth of trying to feature the individuals of the band. So when we have a tune like Moon Indigo, really the origins of that tune, we're playing an arrangement of it that's been reworked and Latinized, in other words, turned into a samba, which that it has its origins in Brazil. So we're picking and choosing, we're taking the rhythmic underpinnings of Brazilian music and marrying that with something of Duke's, right? And what I think is going on in this tune, at least to my ears, is that this particular arranger has taken the authentic sound of Duke's original harmonization and planted it into this particular arrangement. So it's dressed up with other stuff around it. He's elaborated on it, but the essential theme that you hear at the beginning and near the end, and the voicing of that. So for instance, Rex Stewart, who played trumpet in the band, had a way of playing an E above the staff on his horn. It was this note. So he had a way of doing it where he kind of cocked the valve a little bit like this. And Duke loved the sound of that. So whenever he would write a chord that had that note in it, he would shift the voicing so that Rex would get that note and he could hear that sound. So that gives you a little bit of the, hopefully, the background of how Duke's music actually worked from the inside, how he thought about music and how he arrived at what it was that he created. Its origins are within his orchestra.